Good morning. As we come on air this Wednesday, Melbourne is assessing the damage of a magnitude 5.8 earthquake. Here are some of the first pictures of damage. A popular burger place partially collapsed. We know that there is damage in multiple locations and high-rise buildings in the city have been evacuated. The tremor was powerful, felt far beyond the Victorian capital, with reports this morning of shaking felt in Canberra, in Sydney, in Adelaide and even in Tasmania. Now, the epicentre was here near Mansfield. That's around 180 kilometres northeast of Melbourne. The earthquake hit at a depth of 10 kilometres and struck just after 9:15 a.m. We have coverage across the country this morning, including an evacuation here in Sydney. We'll be taking you there soon, and shortly we'll be taking you live to our Melbourne newsroom with coverage of this unfolding emergency. Here's Mike Amor.
The damage in Melbourne is around Chapel Street in Prahran. That's where reporter Jody Lee is. And Jody, how significant is the damage there?
Good morning, Mike. It's quite incredible here. This building has literally come crumbling down here on the corner of Chapel Street and Green Street. I'll step out so you guys can get a nice close look at the damage. It's quite incredible that no one was inside Betty's Burgers around 9 o'clock when this quake hit. But witnesses have told 7 News that these bricks didn't just crumble in the traditional sense, that the bricks actually sprayed from the building across Green Street. There is significant damage down the side of Green Street. The bricks have come crashing down onto a car there, but quite incredibly, no one was injured. As I'm sure you can imagine, though, Chapel Street was fairly busy. There are a number of coffee shops in this precinct, and people were just stunned as they felt the ground shake beneath them and the walls quite literally rattle.
Jody, I guess it's lucky that it's a burger joint, so it wasn't lunchtime and people weren't in that particular shop.
Yeah, that's right. We do understand that there's a design studio upstairs from Betty's Burgers, and there was a person inside that office at the time. I don't know if it's somewhat ironic. That woman is Kiwi, and she says she expected to experience something like this in New Zealand, but never in her wildest dreams here in Victoria. So it's so lucky that no one was injured, but the damage here is extensive, and I imagine the cleanup is going to take some time. The road in either direction, Chapel Street, has been closed. There are trams just stopped in their tracks, quite literally, and there are a number of emergency services here, and they will be for some time, Mike.
Yeah, Jody Lee, live in Prahran. Thank you. Tegan Doling is in Bourke Street for us, and Tegan, you've been speaking to people who had to flee their apartments.
That's right, Mike. I was just down in Docklands where all the high-rise apartments are, and there was a lot of people who had to evacuate. They've told me the higher up that they were, the more they were able to feel the tremor, and it lasted around 20 seconds. They said that the entire buildings were moving. One man was actually woken. He was asleep, and he could feel his bed start to shake. That's when he woke up and realised he was living in this earthquake. Now, I spoke to a concierge member down there. He said that a lot of those buildings down in Docklands, they are actually meant to be able to withstand any sort of earthquake, but there's obviously a lot of worry that there could be these aftershocks. We've been told that a 4.8 aftershock is likely, that we've already felt 2, but a lot of the residents down there are worried that there might be aftershocks and that may cause some more damage. Take a listen to what they had to say. So you live in the apartments here in Docklands. Can you run me through what were you doing when the earthquake happened?
Well, I was at work and I was on the ground floor and I was just watching the news conference for the day, and the thing started shaking, and it's like the ground underneath me was like 2, and I started freaking out. So I just ran out of there as soon as I could.
In your office, what was shaking? Can you tell me exactly what you could see and what you could feel?
Well, it was like the chair beneath me, and then like the screen started falling off the desk, and then I was like, oh, something's not right here.
Did you think it was an earthquake initially? I mean, Melbourne earthquake, that doesn't seem right.
That's the first thing that popped in my head. I was like, oh, Melbourne doesn't have earthquakes, we're not under the tectonic plates. But then it just kept going, and I was like, well, I guess it is then. So yeah.
And so has your apartment been evacuated? Did they come down? Did security come down and tell you to leave, or what happened?
The concierge were great. They immediately evacuated everyone. No one went through the stairs. We all went up to the concourse, and it was just really bizarre. All cracking jokes about it too.
Who would have thought in Melbourne we would have an earthquake?
Exactly. I mean, like protests, riots, and earthquake. earthquakes. What's next?
So I was at the end of the Collins Street. I was in level 12. It was shaking a lot and swinging a lot, especially towards the higher floors, like 12th and onwards, 19th, 20th. It was quite a good experience. I mean, a new one for every one of us. Yeah, interesting. And the whole building was evacuated right after 5 minutes. So we all came down. We are trying to grab some coffee right now. And let's see, when do they allow us to go back in?
Yeah, new experience indeed. Tegan, have people been cleared to go back into those apartment buildings?
They have. The concierge has told them that they're allowed to go back, and it seems like Melbourne is almost coming back to normal. Have a look down Bourke Street. Everyone's just sort of going around their merry way again. A lot of people walking around. Obviously, quite a few police officers around as well because of the protest that's happening. But the trams are still going. Public transport's moving. So obviously, despite that 20 seconds of confusion, worry and terrifying for some, it seems as though Melbourne's almost somewhat back to normal, Mike.
No, back to normal as it gets right now. Tegan, thank you. Thousands of workers were forced to flee as city buildings shook. Chanel Vella spoke to workers shortly after the quake occurred.
Just tell me what you felt. We were sitting in the office doing just our usual training, and I was sitting next to a colleague of mine. I actually thought it was her leg shaking, and then I turned over and all of our desks was like shaking. Our computers were going off. And then I guess everyone was like standing up. We were all really scared. After that, we didn't think anything of it. And then we had one of our team leaders just say like, we need to evacuate right now. And then we were all just frequently panicking. We came up onto the road. We actually didn't know where to go because it was pretty full on. But yeah, it was pretty traumatic.
How many people were in your building at the time and how many had to evacuate? Talk me through that evacuation process.
Yeah, so we were actually in just one level. And I think just us, it was about, I don't know, maybe like 50 people. But you can see behind me, there's like the whole building that had to evacuate. It was pretty intense and we had to divide up into two groups. But like even now, I don't even know if everyone made it out, but yeah.
How long do you have to be out here for? What's the rest of your day looking like?
Sorry, if you start talking, please, can you just move up this way, please?
We don't know how long we're going to be out here for. We have no other updates, but I guess until it's safe for us to go back.
Let's go live now to earthquake scientist, Associate Professor Mark Quigley from the University of Melbourne. Professor, thanks for joining us. This was felt far and wide, but thankfully the epicentre was in a pretty remote area.
Yeah, Mike, it was near Lake Eildon, about 30 or 40 kilometres to the southeast, that area, near places like Kevington and Jameson, if you've been up in that region. So good more than 130 kilometres away from Melbourne, but it was still strongly felt here.
Yeah, we're hearing multiple reports this morning about the size of the earthquake. It normally takes a little while to get the true accurate figure. What's the magnitude now?
At the moment, we're rolling with something between a 5.6 and a 5.8 magnitude. So we're talking about a fault that's maybe on the order of 3 or 4, maybe 5 kilometres long, 5 kilometres wide, moving about a metre or so. And it's that breaking of rocks, that sudden breaking of rocks that creates the seismic energy that moves out from the earthquake source and is felt around the region.
Now, having lived in LA for 20 years, I've experienced a few of the tremors that come after earthquakes. Should we be expecting them, and what should we do if we do have one?
Yeah, we've already had some fairly strong aftershocks in the local area. So for a fault of this size, we would expect most of the aftershocks to be occurring within 10 to 20 kilometres of the actual fault that broke. Whether we feel those in Melbourne or not will depend on how big the earthquake, the aftershocks are. But certainly in the local region, some of them could be felt very strongly, especially if they're occurring very close to where people are. So anything around, any activities like going up on ladders or going on roofs or any of that sort of stuff is press pause on that. That's not a good idea. Usually the aftershock sequence is at its most intense in the first few hours to days, and the rate of aftershocks decreases, but certainly we would expect aftershocks in this region for weeks and even months after this event.
Mark, we're not used to earthquakes here. What should people do when there is one?
Yeah, so We do get an earthquake of this magnitude on average every sort of 5 to 15 years in Australia. So it's just the nature of our population distribution. That means that they very rarely impact on us directly. But even in the last few years, we've had magnitude 6 earthquakes in Australia, and most notably the one in 2016 near Uluru. In terms of what to do, I mean, my wife and I are well versed in this. We lived in Christchurch, New Zealand throughout the 2010-2011 earthquake sequence there. Going to doorways and holding on, moving under tables if you're worried about things falling on top of you and so on is best practice. And being very aware of your environment as well. Melbourne has a real issue with a lot of unreinforced masonry buildings. We are very vulnerable to earthquake shaking in Melbourne and a lot of other cities in Australia. And so one needs to be very aware of their environments. I would not advise being out on the street where you have large overhangs, where you're up against brick walls that you can see, for example, cracks through the masonry, these sort of things. We really need to be more aware of our environment in that context.
Always good advice. Mark Quigley from the University of Melbourne. Thanks for your time. What an unusual day.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Prime Minister Scott Morrison has just held a media conference in the United States following the earthquake. Here's what he had to say.
Well, good evening here from Washington. On the way in from the airport, we learned of the earthquake which has occurred in Mansfield in Victoria. Geosciences provide us with the advice of a record of 6 with aftershocks at 5.5, 4 and 4. I've been in contact with Premier Andrews as well as the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister McKenzie, and we'll continue to receive reports throughout the night. Of course, that first response has obviously been provided by the Victorian Government, but of course the Federal Government stands by through Emergency Management Australia to provide whatever assistance is needed, whether from the ADF or others. But at this stage, we have had no reports of serious injuries or worse, and that is very good news, and we hope that that good news will continue. But obviously, we'll get further reports as the night unfolds here in the United States. But it can be a very disturbing event for an earthquake of this nature. They are very rare events in Australia, and as a result, I'm sure people would have been quite distressed and disturbed by that, particularly in the most immediate area affected.
Victoria has recorded its worst day of the current COVID outbreak and our third wave. There are 628 new cases today and sadly 3 deaths. More than 60,000 tests were recorded over the past 24 hours and more than 43,000 vaccines administered at our state hubs. You're watching a special edition of 7 News live from Melbourne. Stay with us with our live coverage.
And that's where we'll leave our Melbourne newsroom for now. Here in Sydney, we're at the scene of an evacuation in the city's north. Let's go live to Evan Batten in Hornsby. Good morning, Evan. Evan, residents there are reporting cracks in the building.
Oh, good morning, Anne. Yeah, that's right. Quite concerning. So far away from Melbourne, and yet here on Sydney's upper north shore at Hornsby, Horizon Towers on the Pacific Highway this morning. Residents on level 6 and above of one of the tower blocks in this apartment complex reported feeling the building swaying, rocking quite noticeably. In their units, in their homes, they saw light fittings move, curtains moving. They called the caretakers who are located on site just downstairs, who called police and the fire brigade, and the residents were told initially they had to get out.
Evan, what are people saying to you? Are they concerned? Are they frightened about the situation? Did they say they felt any tremor?
And we did speak a short time ago to the caretaker. They told us that people were initially very concerned. The shake that they felt here was quite noticeable. As I say, they were initially told to leave the building. Now, in the last couple of minutes, we were told that the inspectors, the engineers have gone through with police. There is some minor damage to the building, but nothing of great significance that will mean that residents need to stay out of the building. They have all been allowed to move back in. So certainly any significant concerns that might be had about long-term structural damage seem to, at this early stage, be put to rest. Anne?
All right, well, that certainly is good to hear. Evan Batten live in Hornsby. Thank you very much, Evan. And the earthquake was felt as far away as the nation's capital. Let's go live to political reporter Rob Scott in Canberra. Rob, good morning to you. Now, the quake impacted the workings of federal parliament this morning.
Yeah, it certainly did, Anne. Now, I know we are a long, long way away from the epicentre of this earthquake, Mansfield. We're some 500 kilometres away here in Canberra, but I've got to say we definitely felt the tremors this morning. Nothing like what we've seen in Victoria, of course, but certainly things in the office here in Parliament House were swaying, and I know a lot of my parliamentary press gallery colleagues felt the same. It lasted a good 15 to 20 seconds, and there are similar reports from right across Canberra. Thankfully, no damage or any injuries, but apart from that, it also impacted some of the parliamentary committees that were going on this morning. Victorian Green Senator Janet Rice was taking part in a community affairs committee when you could see the cameras shaking, and she was obviously quite anxious. Here's a little bit of what happened.
We're going to have to leave it there.
That's fine. Thank you. I'll put some more questions on notice. Thank you.
Look, thank you very much.
It was also mentioned in a separate committee, an economics committee. I think we've got a clip of what went on there now.
Thank you, Chair. I hope the earthquake is not a bad omen for my evidence here today. But
that are a very sophisticated distraction.
So a long, long way away from the epicentre of this earthquake, Anne, but quite clearly a lot of people here in Canberra felt it.
All right, glad you're all okay. Rob Scott, live in Canberra. Thank you very much, Rob. Well, it's a busy morning across the country. Next in 7 News, more coverage of that magnitude 5.8 earthquake rocking Melbourne, as police are also out in force, bracing for another day of protests. Plus, new details on Sydney's roadmap out of lockdown. And the Prime Minister's one-on-one with President Biden. Welcome back to 7 News, where this morning Melbourne is assessing the damage of a magnitude 5.8 earthquake. They also have protesters on the run for a third day in a row. We're going to be going to some live chopper shots of the city where they are rampaging through the streets of the city. Police are out in force. Riot police are there. They're saying there will be zero tolerance on the streets. Yet again, those protesters who claim to be construction workers, but many tradies are home doing what they're supposed to be doing, being safe in this terrible time of COVID right around the country. We'll be taking you live there shortly to see what's happening on the scene. But let's go to Tom Hartley in Sydney now and some COVID news. New details on how Sydney will emerge from lockdown are expected to be revealed today. Overnight, Sydney recorded 1,035 new cases and sadly 5 more deaths. Tom Hartley is in Sydney. Tom, despite those numbers, the New South Wales government is putting together its plan to reopen at 70%.
Yeah, Anne, and a lot of the focus of today's press conferences was getting the public up to speed as to how they'll be able to prove that they are vaccinated, that they do have both doses of the vaccine, so we can enjoy those freedoms that we are being promised. Now, we're talking, and we've heard a lot about this vaccine passport, but we're not really sure what that looks like at this point in time. They're saying that the Services New South Wales app will eventually be updated with details from the federal government, though we are waiting on the federal government to provide those details at this point in time. And so that when we check into a venue, you'll be able to check in, show that your check-in status is being registered and that you're also vaccinated there as well. Now, you can already get your vaccine certificate through the Medicare app, and if you don't have that app, you can call up and arrange for that to be posted out, but that will take a fortnight to be delivered. Now, business owners have been quite critical of this system with so many unknowns still, especially in regards to authority and policing on this. You know, how to handle someone who's unvaccinated when they try to enter their venues. Do they hold authority? Can they actually ask that person to leave? Even going as far to say that extra police will be needed in shopping centres and the like to ensure that people are doing the right thing. One thing that we did hear from the government today is that fraudsters should expect jail time. Take a listen to the Premier on this.
I wanted to again assure our business community that the New South Wales Government will have a similar compliance regime to before the Delta outbreak. We'll make very clear what responsibilities individuals and businesses have in making sure everybody complies to the rules. It won't be very different to what happened beforehand. But of course, as we get closer to that time, we'll remind everybody what the expectations are of business, government and individuals working together.
Giving another quick look at the numbers again today, and 1,035, that's giving us some indication that the curve has indeed flattened, although the government won't say that that is the case just yet. What we do know, no new cases in northern New South Wales, as we know that region, Byron, Kempsey and Tweed, are in their day 2 of a 7-day lockdown, with several venues of concern listed now just this morning in Byron, Kingscliff and Casuarina as well. Extra testing clinics have opened up there. It's also been revealed who caused that lockdown. It was the crew member, or a crew member I should say, who was working on the UK version of the show I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. Now, she was vaccinated, she was an authorised worker allowed to travel up there from Sydney, and the positive test came after she'd visited several venues. One Liberal MP, Catherine Cusack's actually called for the Health Minister, Brad Hazzard, to resign over this, calling it a massive fail, and we're sure to hear from the Minister soon today.
Tom Hartley with the very latest from Sydney. Thank you very much, Tom. Queensland has reported one new local COVID case, a person already in home quarantine. But the border bubble with New South Wales has burst. A COVID-positive worker from Sydney visited Ballina, Byron Bay and Tweed Heads, sparking a snap 7-day lockdown of the regions. The case has been revealed as a crew member of I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here. The crew member was authorised to travel and was also fully vaccinated. Australian primary school children could have access to the COVID shot by Christmas. Pharmaceutical giant Pfizer has announced it'll apply for emergency authorisation for its vaccine in the United States after clinical trials showed it is safe and effective in children aged 5 to 11. Federal Health Minister Greg Hunt has written to the company encouraging it to apply to Australian authorities at the same time. Doctors say there's more than enough stocks of the vaccine to cover the younger age group as soon as it's approved by the TGA. US President Joe Biden has called Australia one of America's closest allies in his first one-on-one meeting with Scott Morrison. The visit hasn't been all smooth sailing, France again lashing out over the broken submarine deal. Our US correspondent David Woywood has more.
Good morning. Well, Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has met with the US President Joe Biden today, their first one-on-one meeting in a loaded schedule of engagements for the PM, overshadowed by a growing and persistent diplomatic stoush. Both leaders still weathering European scrutiny over their new formalised alliance.
But it's not just about our partnership, because our partnership reaches out to so many others, whether it be our friends in the ASEAN nations or in Europe or elsewhere, where we share so many like-minded interests.
The United States has no closer or more reliable ally than Australia. Our nations have stood together for a long, long time, and we can rely on one another, and that's really a reassuring thing.
That claim today questioned in France. Its defence minister calling out Australia's move to tear up multi-billion-dollar submarine contracts under the AUKUS alliance a strategic turning point, a message relayed to the PM via senior EU leaders.
As you know, for us, transparency and loyalty are fundamental principles in order to build strong partnerships.
The Prime Minister, though, unmoved the decision to side with US technology for construction of the nuclear fleet in the country's national interest, he says.
The world is changing dramatically, particularly in our own region, in the Indo-Pacific. The Indo-Pacific will be a region that will challenge the world and will determine the future of so many all around the world.
It's a message he pushed to EU counterparts in a jam-packed New York schedule before jetting to Washington, D.C. for dinner with the British Prime Minister and third leg of the trilateral agreement, Boris Johnson. Mr Morrison now with days more diplomatic engagements in the US capital, with unsurprisingly no French delegates or representatives on that long list of meetings.
Thanks, David. A woman and 2 children have been killed in a horrifying crash on the New South Wales Central Coast. Another 3 children are in hospital. All were in the same car that crashed down an embankment. Natasha Squarey has more.
Well, the 32-year-old woman was driving along this stretch of road at Central Mangrove around 10 last night when she lost control on a bend before her four-wheel drive rolled down an embankment and slammed into a tree. The woman, her 6-year-old daughter and 10-year-old son died at the scene, while her 3 sons, aged 1, 5 and 9, were flown to John Hunter Hospital with minor injuries.
And I'm very pleased to say that they have survived this tragedy. They remain in a stable condition and under observation.
To add more heartache to this story, another driver, a 37-year-old man, was coming along the same road after the crash. He ran over one of the children who'd been thrown from the car. It's unclear if that child was already deceased. Locals today are utterly devastated and say the road here is extremely dangerous.
It's very saddening thinking that a mother and her children are along the road and this has happened. It is unheard of up here.
Everybody knows about it because it's a small community and it's just so sad. It's a shocking road. Twists and turns and bends everywhere, dangerous.
Wiseman's Ferry Road has reopened as specialist officers continue to investigate what led to this tragic crash. The 3 surviving children remain in hospital.
Thanks, Tash. A lava flow from a volcano on Spain's Canary Islands is consuming homes on La Palma. Residents fled after the volcano first erupted on Sunday. More than 1,000 homes are under threat. The lava flow is now unstoppable as it consumes homes and overwhelms swimming pools. Scientists say the lava flows could continue for weeks or even months. The European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Russia was responsible for the death of Alexander Litvinenko, who was fatally poisoned in London in 2006. The ruling comes on the same day that a British court named a 3rd Russian suspect in the Salisbury Novichok poisonings of 2018. Denis Sergeyev cannot be formally charged unless he's arrested, but Russia is refusing to comply with extradition requests. The Duchess of Cambridge has had an active day out in Britain's Lake District. Kate showed off her adventurous spirit, mountain bike riding and abseiling with the Air Force cadets. Hugh Whitfield has more.
We know the Cambridges like showing off their sporting skills, but Kate was getting really adventurous today in the Lake District in the north of England, going off a cliff, albeit abseiling, and mountain biking, all about showing the benefits of spending time outdoors, particularly for young people, to help improve their mental health and showcase a new RAF Air Cadets training centre. Kate is the Honorary Commandant of the Air Cadets here in the UK, a position she took on from Prince Philip, who's being fondly remembered by family members. We've been given a sneak peek of a new documentary to air here in the UK. You're about to see Zara Tindall, her brother Peter Phillips and cousin Prince William talking about what would happen if their grandfather gave them a tube of mustard at family barbecues.
He used to get in a lot of trouble from my grandmother for covering most of the places we had lunch and things with mustard on the ceiling.
I actually think the marks are still there.
I think so. Lots of very happy memories of their grandfather, and we're expecting to hear more from other members of the royal family when this documentary airs here in Britain in the next 24 hours.
Thanks, Hugh. Next in 7 News, we'll have sport with Pat Welsh, including more accolades for Melbourne's coach ahead of the AFL Grand Final. And 2 Panthers stars racing the clock to be fit for their NRL preliminary final.
Good morning. Preparations for the AFL Grand Final will ramp up today in Perth. Both the Western Bulldogs and Demons will train today behind closed doors at Optus Stadium in what will be their main session. It's a crucial workout for Melbourne's Stephen May, who will put his hamstring to the test. Dogs defender Alex Keith is also looking to prove his fitness from a hamstring injury. Overnight, D's coach Simon Goodwin was awarded Coach of the Year. In the NRL, Panther star Brian To'o is confident he'll recover from an ankle injury in time for Saturday's grand final qualifier against reigning premiers Melbourne. The Blues Origin winger has been named in the extended squad but needs to prove his fitness.
Yeah, he's good. He's looking good. Big ups for us, for Bizzo as well. Hopefully he gets through these next couple of tests throughout the week and he's sweet to play.
Star Viliame Kikau has also an ankle injury but is expected to play, while Stormflyer Josh Addo-Carr will return from a hamstring strain. Sam Kerr's 100th game for the Matildas didn't go to plan in Dublin this morning. Ireland took the lead inside 3 minutes as Australia's defensive frailties re-emerged. The teenager, regarded as Kerr's heir apparent, Mary Fowler, kept the Matildas in the contest with a first half double.
Here's Mary Fowler, heavy deflection, it loops up and in. Fowler has a second.
A goal shortly after the break was enough for the Irish to eke out a surprise 3-2 win. Liverpool's hot start to the season continues. A second-string Reds outfit eased into the third round of the League Cup with a 3-0 win over Norwich City.
Oh, can he finish? Yes, he can. It's a second goal for Takumi Minamino.
Merseyside rivals Everton are out after losing to second-tier side QPR in a penalty shootout. Defending champions Manchester City conceded early against third-tier side Wycombe Wanderers, but recovered to win it easily 6-1. Ben Simmons' time in Philadelphia appears all but over. Reports in the US say the Aussie NBA star will refuse to report to training camp next week and will sit out the start of the season if necessary in an effort to force a trade. Simmons' future with the 76ers has been up in the air after a poor showing in Philadelphia's playoff series loss to Atlanta. And we saw one of cricket's great chokes in the IPL overnight. Punjab needed only 8 runs off the last 2 overs with 8 wickets in hand to beat Rajasthan. But the Kings crumbled, scoring only 5 runs, including 1 off the last over.
Brilliant! Rajasthan Royals snatch a victory out of the jaws of defeat.
Rajasthan won by 2 runs, moving to 5th on the ladder. And that wraps up a busy morning in sporting.
Yeah, certainly does. Thanks a lot, Pat. Good to see you. Coming up next in 7's Morning News, the latest from Melbourne's earthquake zone, and we'll have your national weather forecast for you. Welcome back. Updating our top story this morning, and a magnitude 5.8 earthquake has hit Victoria. We're seeing damage in Melbourne from the quake, which was centred about 180 kilometres northeast of the city. It was felt far and wide. There are evacuations here in Sydney after reports of cracks. The ground also felt shaking in the ACT, in South Australia and Tasmania. Experts say it's Victoria's largest quake in the last 50 years, and there are warnings of more aftershocks to come. And also in Melbourne today, a protest continues for the 3rd day. Anti-lockdown protesters have taken to the streets. Paul Dowsley is there. Paul, yesterday a torrid day talking to you as you reported from these scenes. What's the situation on the ground there today? All right, we can't hear Paul at the moment. He's down there in the thick of it, and we are getting audio from him occasionally, and then we're losing him. So I'll just let you know that these are scenes live in Melbourne, the protesters rampaging through the streets for a 3rd day. They're running towards Southern Cross Station, we understand, but police are waiting for them. They've already fired some rubber bullets this morning. They're swarming around. There's zero tolerance for any violence. It doesn't appear to be any violence so far, but it's certainly far from calm. It's good news considering everything else that's happening on the streets of Melbourne this morning with that 5.8 quake. People have been forced out of their homes. The live chopper shots now rushing towards, we can see the protesters running around the corner there. They're scattering around. They must be playing a cat and mouse game with the police, who are holding them off, but they're certainly not going home, despite what we saw yesterday. They're wearing masks, they're wearing beanies, so they can't be identified, but they still haven't let up for a 3rd day. What we're going to do now is take you live to our station in Melbourne, who are speaking with some of the reporters. So here's Mike Amor in Melbourne.
Come down to these protesters and stop them from causing that same sort of chaos that we saw yesterday, Mike. Yeah, there's not many cars in the city at the moment, understandably given the lockdown, but they are running around in the traffic, so that in itself is quite dangerous. I asked Paul before, but I wondered whether you got a sense of the anger of this crowd. Is it the same levels as it was yesterday? I think it is. When we were just down talking a bit earlier about the earthquake, we had a lot of smaller groups coming past us, still yelling abuse, still feeling angry. They're not protesting, they're just wanting to spark some sort of heated debate and some anger. So I definitely feel like that is starting to grow here at the moment, and it's a worry as to what's going to happen when they do eventually come together in that huge group like we saw yesterday. Yeah, again, we're seeing live chopper shots of the group kind of running. Well, they're not running at the moment, but they're certainly on the move again, Tegan. Again, I wish I could tell you where they're going to, but it's hard to tell from that tight chopper shot. I get the sense that police are just going to keep following them today.
Yeah, I think so. And look, they said there was 500 police on the ground yesterday. I'd be pretty confident to say there's a lot more police down here today. We've also already seen the critical incident response team walking around. That huge display of the public order response that I showed you earlier, we have never, my cameraman here is 30 years in the job, he has never seen anything like this here in Melbourne. So it's incredible the amount of resources that police are pouring into it. The Chief Commissioner said that they were going to take on different tactics today. Clearly they are doing that, but clearly the protesters are too, Mike, considering this splintering off that we're seeing.
OK, Tegan, stay there. We'll come back to you if we can. Let's go back to Paul Dowsley. Paul, where are you?
We are heading down towards Spencer Street station now. I'm going to turn right here at King Street because for those who are familiar with this end of town, I'm told that this group has now ended up near the Men's Gallery, which is on King Street. So you can see at the bottom of the street, and we're going to keep moving because we need to get there. You can see down the street here the number of police who are parked at this intersection. So I believe that the protest is one of these splinter groups and possibly one of the larger groups are at this intersection or just further up on King Street, Mike.
Yeah, welcome to those viewers who are joining us around the country. Just to update them, we are seeing another day of protest in the city, and it seems that these protesters have splintered into smaller groups. Paul Dowsley, our reporter there, trying to get to one of the groups. Police are playing another game of cat and mouse throughout the CBD. We haven't seen the signs of violence. Go, Paul.
Mike?
Go, Paul.
You're seeing this group? Ollie, my colleague here, cameraman, is zooming in on this group that we can see that is in Gresham Street, one of the laneways of Melbourne. It's hard to tell how big this group is, but they are clearly stopping there, not sure which direction to go, making a decision. I think that's three different options they have, left, right or straight ahead. And Mike, they're coming straight for us, coming in this direction. Here we have police. You can see a man running towards us.
Well, Paul, please stay safe. They seem to have turned, by the way, if you can see that.
Yes, indeed. One man has come down here with a sign. And you have members of the public who are watching this. Police are trying to grab that man there. They're grabbing him on the footpath. He's pulled up to the left, Ollie, up the stairs. He's running away. Police couldn't quite grab him, but he has dropped his sign on the footpath. He tried to make a run for it. The police were so close to him. They may have even touched him, but he looks like a pretty fit bloke, and he outrun the officers. And given the protesters are down there, I wouldn't expect many police would find that a wise move to be running after just one person. We're going to head up this way now.
Paul, viewers from around the country have joined us. Just give them an update of how today has unfolded compared to yesterday.
Well, last night our Chief Commissioner, Shane Patton, he promised different tactics today. He said that what we saw yesterday would not be allowed to happen. And then today we've also seen fresh tactics from the protesters. Instead of staying in one group, whether by design or whether by chance or luck, they've splintered off into smaller groups. I have seen some at the top end of town who are trying to find the main group, so maybe they are trying to regather now, but it's made the job so much more difficult for police because their plans presumably would be about trying to... See, and this is what happens. People say fake news all the time.
What about the inaccurate PCR test? It's a DNA amplification tool.
Okay.
Yeah, so
there you go.
So that's what the cases are based upon.
Okay. We've reported that.
Yeah, so what are you going to do about it?
Well, you've just reported it.
Okay, great, but are you going to stream it? Because
you're live on the air, mate, so there you go. So there you go. So you have people who have...
the money?
So people have... Follow the money, he says.
Follow the money.
Yeah, we're following the protesters at the moment, but I appreciate your thoughts. So this is what happens. People come up, but they won't actually...
Dollars have been made by the pharmaceutical companies.
So people blaming it on pharmaceutical companies wanting profits rather than the health of people. So do you believe COVID is real?
No, not
so,
at all.
Okay, so there you go. He doesn't believe COVID actually exists. So this is the mentality of some of the people here. Either don't believe it exists, don't believe that vaccines should be mandatory.
Okay, Paul, I think we're going to let you take a breather.
You're an anti-this.
Let's take a breather from Paul before this gets out of control. We're going to go to the chopper shop. Can we go to the chopper shop?
On the back of a food packet.
Yep.
So you're an
Obviously,
anti-fooder now?
we've had some trouble with Paul being injured there yesterday. Let's get away from Paul and give him a break just to update our viewers of what's happening. There's the live chopper shot. You can see some of the protesters today that have splintered into groups that seem to be trying to outrun the police. As Paul mentioned, they have promised today, the police, to use tougher tactics to crack down and avoid this cat and mouse style protest that we saw yesterday that caused so much chaos in the city. They started outside the CFMEU headquarters and then were forced to march by the police to the State Parliament, which was heavily protected, then in turn to the local Trades Hall building here, and then they ended up on the Westgate Bridge and staged to sit in for something like half an hour, and you can imagine for those people who know Melbourne, that's one of the main arterials into the city. For people in Melbourne, this chopper is over Williams Street, we understand. It's near the Victorian Supreme Court, to give you an idea of where they're going. We don't know where they're going, obviously, at the moment. It doesn't seem like they do either. Anytime they see the police, they seem to turn away. We don't know what their end goal is. Maybe they don't know what their end goal is. We don't know whether these groups are communicating, coordinating between themselves. But what we do know is yesterday we saw dozens of protesters arrested already. Premier Daniel Andrews has spoken very early this morning about the protests, condemned them in the strongest way. Let's go back to Tegan Doling, who is in another part of the city. Tegan, what's happening where you are?
Mike, we've actually just caught up to the back of this protest that we saw. This back of the protest is actually where Dowsley was up a bit earlier, and they've come down this one-way street. Now, that means that the police haven't been able to catch up with them. This is an area that the police haven't been able to get to. So because we're in a one-way street, they've continued to walk down, and it looks like they're now turning left back down Elizabeth Street, I think. So this is actually the biggest part of the protest. All those little splintered areas have now got together, and they're starting to walk all the way back down. We actually haven't seen a police car, though, since they've started to walk down here. So it looks like they may be focusing on other areas of the splintered groups, Mike.
We can see some protesters there behind you. They seem like they're okay at the moment, but be aware. You have no idea where they're heading to. Obviously, police are playing a game of cat and mouse, and the media as well.
That's disgusting. Yeah, that's correct. It looks like they've just turned left down the end of this one-way road, but there's no police in sight. There's actually quite a few different areas of people, quite a few different people walking down here, and they're trying to join this big protest, but they are all just walking down. It looks like they're all starting to splinter again, but that core group, there's a very, very big core group at the moment. It looks like it is starting to grow, Mike, almost as big as what we saw in the last couple of days. But where the police are, I'm not sure. They're nowhere in sight here where we are at the moment.
We heard that man behind you talking. I just wonder, what is the mood of the crowd? It was very angry yesterday. You're getting the sense of that again today?
Yeah, absolutely. Very much a sense of anger. That man was screaming about fake news, as we've obviously heard for the last couple of days, but very much a sense of anger. The people, as we started to trail down and were listening to them, they started to chant again, all those chants that we heard yesterday about the vaccine, about sacking Dan Andrews. So very much that anger, I worry. It seems like it's really starting to build out here as they continue to play cat and mouse with the police.
Yeah, it's important to remind people what they claim this is all about. The construction industry has been shut down here in Victoria for 2 weeks. But again, I think we saw something like 300 infections linked to the construction industry today, I believe. And they say that the construction industry wasn't compliant with the COVID orders. And in fact, they then mandated vaccinations to begin on Friday for the construction industry. That led to that initial very, very violent protest a couple of days ago, right, T?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And we've heard today that there's a couple of work sites that were deemed mandatory. They could continue to work, but unfortunately now they have also been shut down. They're worried that this large angry mob may actually turn on the people that are working at those construction sites. So now the entire sector is shut down. Just as I'm talking, there is a small group, it looks like a splinter group, that is actually coming from this side of me, and it looks like they're now looking to try and find out where they're going to go. It seems like they're all trying to get together and join up to be a big group. Might throw it back to you, Mike.
OK, take care there, Tegan, please. Obviously, we're seeing some people come past, and we apologise if their language is getting through. I think they've passed. No, we're going to go throw to a break. Our special coverage of the unfolding drama in Melbourne right now with two major breaking stories. First, an earthquake this morning, a magnitude between 5.8 and 6, and also this unfolding protest on day 3. Stay with us. Our coverage continues next. Covering two major breaking stories right now. Day 3 of the angry protest by construction workers continues in the CBD. We'll have more on that in a minute. But Melbourne has also experienced its biggest earthquake since records began. The magnitude between 5.8 and 6 quake was felt as far away as Canberra and Sydney. The worst of the damage is on Chapel Street, where a number of buildings have collapsed, or at least partially. Homes across Victoria have also been extensively damaged, but there are no reports, thankfully, of any injuries at this point. Thousands of people have been evacuated from apartment buildings across the CBD. The epicentre was at Lacola North, that's near Woods Point in the Gippsland High Country. Melbourne Airport suspended operations this morning, but flights have since resumed. Aftershocks are expected throughout the day, and in fact, we've already been told a number have happened. Let's go back to reporter Jody Lee, who is on Chapel Street, where a lot of the damage has happened. Jody, how significant is the damage there?
Good morning, Mike. Great to chat. Well, the damage is extensive. I'll step out of frame so you guys can get a really clear idea of what's unfolded here on Chapel Street in Windsor. Eyewitnesses have told us that that brick wall didn't just crumble in the traditional sense, but those bricks sprayed like bullets out the side of Betty's Burgers across Green Street. We've now discovered that those bricks have destroyed a bench on the pavement and damaged quite significantly one local resident's car, but incredibly no one here was injured. Chapel Street is somewhat quieter than usual given we're in lockdown at the moment, but there are a number of coffee shops here and local traders tell me that people were just stunned. The windows on shops here were rattling, the ground trembled beneath people's feet. There was one woman inside that building. She works in a design business upstairs from Betty's Burgers. Ironically, she's a Kiwi. She says she would be used to this kind of activity in New Zealand, but never in her wildest dreams expected it would happen here in Melbourne. She took shelter as the earthquake happened and thankfully is uninjured and is fine recovering at home, Mike.
Yeah, I know you're not a structural engineer, nor am I, Jody, but are you hearing any reports whether that building can be saved, or is it that badly damaged?
The truth is I don't think they know at this stage. The road here is cordoned off and closed. We spoke to the managing director of Betty's Burgers a short time ago. They were in nearby Elstonwick preparing to open up a restaurant and came here to survey the damage. They were in shock when we spoke to them. They'll have to have, as you mentioned, structural engineers come here to survey the scene. At the moment, though, the focus has been the power lines. When the bricks came down, they brought down part of the power lines on Green Street and on Chapel Street. So we've had workers here bringing down the remainder of those power lines. Obviously, there are Yarra tram workers here as well. So I think it will be some time before engineers are able to get in and really assess the extent of the damage to this building. But important to recognise that a number of the facades, certainly of the buildings here on Chapel Street, are heritage listed. You know, this one has the date 1881 written on the top. I'm not sure if that's exactly when it was built, but they certainly date a far way back. So incredible that more of them didn't come crumbling down.
Jody, are people frightened also?
Well, we'll leave our coverage in Melbourne on a day of a major earthquake and also protesters for a third day rampaging through the CBD. Our thanks to my colleague Mike Amor and the team in Melbourne. I'm going to give you a little bit of weather now. A cold front is generating wild surf showers and highland snow across southern Victoria, Tasmania and eastern New South Wales. A high is keeping elsewhere dry and settled. Around the national capitals, a sunny one for Brisbane, a top of 24 degrees. Sydney mostly sunny and 20. Canberra mostly sunny 17. Melbourne morning drizzle and 17 degrees. Hobart a sunny day, a top of 20. A cloudy one for Adelaide and 17. Sunny and warm in Perth, 27 today. And for Darwin, a sunny day, 36 degrees ahead. And that is 7 News to Now. We'll keep you up to date throughout the day with all the developing news across the southeast of the country. Our next major bulletin is at 4 p.m. I'm Ann Sanders. Thanks for your company. Have a lovely day. Stay safe.